start. I'm Charlotte Carrington-Farmer. I'm an associate professor of history at Roger Williams University, and I'm going to be chairing this session this morning on asking difficult questions about historical memory, including new voices in public history projects. And what I plan to do is we'll hear each of the papers and then we'll save the questions for everybody and save our questions to the end. And we will turn now to our third and final presenter. So Stephen Venuti is a former environmental consultant who is here today in his capacity as the president of the Barrington, Rhode Island Preservation Society. He's been involved in a wide range of public history projects in Rhode Island, and he's published several articles in the Barrington Preservation Society newsletter, including John Williams, born a slave in Virginia, died a freedman in Rhode Island. He's written the tour, Taverns to Temperance, a spirited tour of Old Barrington Village, Road Tour, for the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities funded project on public history entitled Road Tours. He's given keynote speeches and produced a range of educational videos on Barrington's rich and varied history. Today's talk is titled Beyond the Monument, Reconsidering the History of Enslavement in Barrington, Rhode Island. Stephen, I turn over to you.
There we go. On June 15th, 1903, the New York Times reported on page 3 that the first memorial in this country dedicated to Negro slaves and their descendants had been erected the day before in Barrington, Rhode Island. Located in Barrington's Princess Hill Cemetery, this memorial monument includes a bronze plaque reading, "In memory of the Negro slaves and their descendants who faithfully served Barrington families." There is no photograph or image of the monument included in the New York Times article, but in his speech, local resident, historian, and former Rhode Island Commissioner of Public Schools, Thomas William Bicknell, included the following words in his dedication speech. "By these humble mounds under which sleep the dusky children of African birth, by the marker of the Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, standing here to represent all their patriot dead, by this white boulder, supported at each corner by its black ironstone support, emblematic of the relations of the two races." It's worth noting that both Bicknell's immediate and extended families were amongst those slaveholding families prominently represented by the relatively large white boulder. Like the large white boulder, Bicknell's prominence is firmly established through his many writings, most notably his often referenced and cited books, A History of Barrington, Rhode Island, published in 1898, and Soam's, published in 1908. These writings provide a fairly thorough history of the early European settlers from their first encounters with the indigenous Wampanoag and Pokanoket peoples through the establishment of the town into the 19th century. Equally worth noting is, much like the now barely visible black ironstone supports at the four corners of the monument, the details of the lives of those formerly enslaved Indians, Negroes, and mulatto men, women, and children have either been totally lost, reduced to numbers on census records, or hidden in the dusty archives of town halls and historical societies. Although Bicknell refers in his speech to the humble mounds under which sleep the dusky children of African birth, neither the cemetery records nor the monument itself at Princess Hill reveal the names of those who may be buried there or elsewhere in unmarked graves. According to the colonial census of 1774, the total population of Rhode Island was recorded as 59,707. Included in this number were 1,479 Indians and 3,668 blacks, with the total number of Indian and blacks combined accounting for just under 9% of the total population. Although Barrington at that time was then, as it is now, a relatively small town, the population mix was similar to the colony as a whole. Barrington's total population was recorded at 601. Included in these 601 inhabitants were 18 Indians, 41 Blacks, with the total number of Indian and Black combined accounting for just under 10% of the total population. The 1774 census did not specify how many and or who among the 59 total Indian or Blacks may have been enslaved, but it can reasonably be inferred that the 51 living in homes with a white head of household were either indentured or enslaved. Beginning in 1790, following the American Revolution, the United States collected new census data every 10 years. Data included in the census record conducted between the American Revolution and the Civil War did, however, differentiate between free white people and the enslaved people of color. These census records show that a steady decrease in the enslaved population of Barrington from a high of 51 in 1774 down to 12 in 1790, 7 in 1800, 3 in 1810, and then 1 in both 1820 and 1830. By 1840, no more enslaved people were listed in the census. Although it took a civil war to end slavery in the nation as a whole, there were two significant legislative acts that led to the total elimination of slavery in Barrington sometime between 1830 and 1840. One was the Legislative Act of 1784, authorizing the manumission of Negroes, mulattoes, and others, and for the gradual abolition of slavery. Since the freeing of those enslaved through manumission placed a financial responsibility on the former owners, the census data often showed that these white households, listing a number of slaves in earlier census records, later showed a similar number of free persons of color in the subsequent census records. The other development was the vote by the Rhode Island General Assembly on February 14, 1778, in direct response to a request from General Washington, establishing what has since become known as the First Black Regiment. This legislative act, in part, reads as follows. It is voted and resolved that every able-bodied Negro, mulatto, or Indian man-slave in this state may enlist to serve during the continuance of the present war with Great Britain, that every slave so enlisting shall be entitled to and receive all the bounties, wages, and encouragements allowed by the Continental Congress to any soldier enlisting in their service. That every slave so enlisting shall be immediately discharged from the service of his master or mistress and be absolutely free as though he had never been encumbered with any kind of servitude or slavery. That there be allowed and paid by the state to the owner for every such slave so enlisting a sum according to his worth, at a price not exceeding 120 pounds for the most valuable slave, and in proportion for a slave of less value. Soon after the formal establishment of the First Black Regiment, a significant battle took place in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, known as the Battle of Rhode Island, where the newly enlisted soldiers reportedly fought bravely. In 1976, the Rhode Island branch of the NAACP erected a stone marker near the battlefield. The inscription on the marker reads, "In honor of the first Black slaves and freemen who fought in the Battle of Rhode Island as members of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment." Also erected at this site is a much larger monument inscribed with the names of over 700 soldiers who enlisted in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. Included in this list of 700 soldiers are at least 13 people of color known or believed to have lived in Barrington prior to enlisting. Joshua Quam is listed as an Indian head of household in the 1774 census, so he likely enlisted as one of the free men of color. The 5 men listed with the Allen surname, and possibly others, are believed to have been enslaved by Thomas William Bicknell's ancestors, Matthew and Thomas Allen. The Barrington Preservation Society, with the help of Roger Williams University, Dr. Charlotte Carrington-Farmer, and 3 of her undergraduate students, is actively researching Barrington's past history of enslaved persons of color, including those whose names appear on the 1st Black Regiment, the monument to the 1st Black Regiment. We hope someday to be able to tell all their stories, including the stories of women and children who were enslaved as well. For now, we can touch briefly on the lives of 2 men whose names are memorialized at the Portsmouth Battlesmith Monument, Thomas Reynolds and Cato Bannister. Included in the Barrington Town Museum archives are 3 handwritten notes regarding the enlistment of Thomas Reynolds. The first is dated May 17th, 1777, and reads as follows. These may certify all to whom it may concern that Thomas Reynolds, a Negro man, was really and truly enlisted upon and in behalf of Messrs. Nathaniel and Peleg Heath, signed Simon Smith, Ensign. The next is dated May 20th, 1777, and reads, then came personally Mr. Nathaniel Heath and made solemn oath that Thomas Reynolds, a Negro man, was bona fide enlisted by and for himself and brother Peleg Heath. Signed, Solomon Townsend Jr., Justice of the Peace. This second note is apparently the certification that the Heath brothers needed to be compensated for their loss of quote-unquote property. In a separate record obtained from the Ancestry.com military files dated September 11, 1777, Thomas Reynolds appears on the muster roll of the 1st Rhode Island Battalion under the command of Colonel Christopher Green. In the columns beside his names, it records that Thomas Reynolds enlisted on May 17th and for the entire duration of the war. The third handwritten note included in the Barrington Town Museum records is dated December 17th, 1777, and reads, received of Nathaniel Heath, the sum of 44 pounds 10, being on and of enlisting man. Signed, Joseph Clark, Treasurer, Providence. It's worth noting that this enlistment and the payment made to the Heaths compensating for their loss actually precedes the Rhode Island legislation by several months. Thomas Reynolds next appears in the muster roll of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment on April 1st, 1778, while camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It has been reported that more men died at Valley Forge in the preceding winter from cold, hunger, and disease than in any actual battle fought at that time. In fact, it was this loss of men that prompted General Washington to ask Rhode Island to formally establish the 1st Black Regiment. Reynolds, who survived his times at Valley Forge, is later recorded as receiving 5 pounds pay on January 7, 1780 for 2 months' service. An interesting side note is that 2 other men from Barrington, Prince and Pomp Watson, also appear on the same payroll record. It's unknown exactly what battles, other than the Battle of Rhode Island, Reynolds may have fought, but by May 4th, 1781. He is listed on the muster rolls of the 1st Battalion as sick at Camp Rhode Island. He's also listed in the book Forgotten Patriots, published by the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution, as transferred to invalids on May 1st, 1781. It's unknown what became of Mr. Reynolds after this, but it's clear that he paid an incalculable cost in his quest for freedom. Next, we come to Cato Bannister. On February 28, 1746, John Bannister II, the Newport merchant and slave trader whose family Bannister Wharf is named, paid Rick Dunn 120 pounds cash for the Negro Cato. Though Bannister continued to own him, Cato was subsequently indentured to an Elkanah Humphrey of Barrington. According to the 1774 colonial census, one Negro was recorded as living in the Barrington home of Elkanah Humphrey at that time. Though it cannot be said for certainty, this Negro was very probably the indentured servant Cato. By 1777, Cato was enlisted in what became known as the 1st Black Regiment. On May 4th, 1781, he appears on the muster roll of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment while at the Rhode Island Village Camp in New York, along with 2 other men from Barrington, Prince Brown and Prince Ingraham. His length of enlistment is recorded here as being for the duration of the war. Sadly, we know he did not survive that long. Following the Battle of Rhode Island, Cato fought alongside Colonel Christopher Green in multiple engagements. Their last battle together was the Battle of Croton River in Westchester County, New York, on May 14th, 1781. Wikipedia, citing the papers held by the Rhode Island Historical Society, includes the following account of that fateful battle. Colonel Green and Major Ebenezer Flagg, along with 6 black soldiers, including Cato Bannister, were killed when a group of loyalist insurgents known as the Royal Refugee Corps surrounded Green's headquarters on the Croton River. Green's body was found in the woods about a mile distance from his tent, cut and mangled in the most shocking way. A common conjecture is that this indignity was retribution for his leading black soldiers against the British Crown. Though Cato paid the ultimate price in his quest for freedom, both Elkanah Humphrey and John Bannister were the ones to be compensated. In accordance with the Rhode Island Act of February 14, 1778, John Bannister collected 105 pounds, while Elkanah Humphrey collected 8.2 pounds for his quote-unquote interest in the slave's value. In his oft-quoted speech delivered on July 5th, 1852, some 71 years after Cato gave his life and Thomas was left as an invalid in their respective quest for freedom, Frederick Douglass asked, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. It is a sad reality that not only did the enslaved people of color who fought alongside their white brothers to free the country from British rule for their personal freedom, as well as their sacrifice, were too long forgotten. There is another monument at the Portsmouth battlefield. It's a small granite marker holding a brass plaque of the Rhode Island Slave History Medallion Project. Visitors to the site can use the embedded QR code on the medallion in their smartphone to link into a detailed history of the battle and the men of the 1st Black Regiment Battalion who fought there. It is hoped that the work we are doing to learn the history of the men, women, and children enslaved in Barrington will lead to a similar monument somewhere in the town. Thank you.
Brilliant job, Stephen. Thank you so much for rounding out what has been a absolutely fabulous panel.